Welcome to the Business Greater Than You podcast, where we dive deep into the stories of men and women who have successfully transcended the frazzled solopreneur life and built productive teams with better lifestyle and income.
I'm Nelson Barss, the founder and owner of Utah Independent Mortgage Corp.
And I'm Liz Sears, founder and co-owner of My Utah Agents.
We're excited for you to listen, interact, and grow with us. So please share your comments below and let's get started.
Excited for today's episode.
Yep, glad to be back.
Yeah, not necessarily a fun topic, but definitely a necessary topic if you want to be successful in your business.
Yeah, we're going to talk about letting people go.
Yeah.
Firing.
I know it's one of those when you start to say it, and you're like, yeah, it's a tough one. But, you know, any good tree that grows gets pruned. Every good garden, same thing.
Right. Yeah. And I think, honestly, that fear of letting people go might be part of the fear of hiring people in the first place. Mm-hmm. So I think it's good to talk about it, get used to the idea, get comfortable with how to do it and when, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's dive in. I think first, let's just talk about getting used to that idea of firing someone. And question for you, Liz, is it a reflection on you as a bad leader if you have to let someone go?
No. It might be a learning opportunity. Sometimes in the exit interview, you can learn some things that maybe you could have been a better leader to begin with. But the one thing that I've learned how to do better the longer that I've been in business is to really embrace the fact that I'm doing the best I can with what I know at the time. Yeah. And so it's not a reflection on me. It's not a reflection on you. It's not a reflection on any of our listeners here. If you have to let someone go, it's just part of the process.
Yeah, I think I've held on to people too long because I didn't want to admit that I made a bad hire.
Right?
Right. In
yeah, because then you're like, oh, I feel dumb.
Yeah, and I'm honestly feeling a little bit sheepish as we start to talk about this because since we last recorded, I've had two people that I let go, or one that quit and one that I let go. Mm-hmm. And I just remember talking about how successful our hiring process was and how we've hired so many people and they're all still with me. And it was a sense of pride and to see those two people go was it was really emotional for me, and I felt like a failure in some ways. Yeah. Right. But
ironically, I did the same thing.
Yeah.
Less than 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So got some good.
We both got some stories to tell, right?
Right.
Yeah. Another question for you: is it cruel? Is it cruel to fire someone? No.
It's definitely not. I think that's where a lot of people get stuck on the firing is they think they're being mean. They think they're being cruel. They think that they're making a decision that's going to really hurt the other person. And a lot of times that other person already knows they're not a good fit. They already know that the job description or the job that's being required of them isn't jiving and that they're not doing a good job. And so how awful is it to go to work every single day and not feel like you're really contributing, to go every single day knowing that other people are disappointed in what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And so firing usually doesn't occur until you've gone through a few steps, but by the time you get to this point, they usually know it's coming. And so it's usually a relief for everybody involved to say, you know what, let's look at the next step with where you're going to go and how it's going to work out.
Well, I would say it's also usually a relief for a lot of other people on the team too.
Yeah.
I've had a couple of cases. I usually am guilty of waiting too long, right? Mm-hmm. Just ignoring the obvious or hoping I can make it work and coaching them up and things. And in the end, you know, when I finally have let the person go and they walk out that door, it's like the whole organization can breathe again, right?
Yeah, because how frustrating is it for somebody who's really stepping up and doing the job well and they're watching somebody else not? Mm-hmm. And it gets really hard on the people who are doing a good job.
Or they're picking up the slack, right? They're doing their job for them and not getting any credit, or seeing that person get paid and seemingly appreciated when they're not doing their job.
Right.
So I think it's actually kind of cruel to delay the inevitable too long. It's cruel. And I also have thought a lot about, you know, I've had employees where I knew it wasn't going to work out, but I was trying to go through the proper processes and
anybody
the timing.
Who's been in for a while.
Yeah. And the longer I let that go, you know, the worse it was for everyone. And I just wish I had done it sooner in some cases.
Yeah.
Right?
So also watching red signs, like how do you recognize, why don't we go there next? How do you recognize when the time is coming and what are the steps that you take?
Well, I guess for me, recognizing repeated training, repeated mistakes. I think there's a difference between someone who is unwilling to do a job or unable. Either way, it's probably time to move on. And I guess I would like to point out too that before I look to let someone go, I look to move them to a different seat.
Yeah.
Right. We've had quite a few people who have moved around within the organization and been much more successful and happier and have a very long-term outlook with us. But it's kind of the idea from Jim Collins from his Good to Great book. You get the right people on the bus, and then
you put them in the right seat.
You decide later what's the right seat, right?
It's interesting. When we first opened our brokerage, we hired 2 admin, and we didn't know where they would shine, and so we actually did train them on everything, which was nice because then they could cover for each other. And then once they started to shine in their own role or their own expertise and what they love to do, then we were able to write up unique job descriptions for them. And so as your company grows and you have more unique job descriptions, in fact, right now we have somebody who is struggling with the role that we had put them into. And we did our leadership meeting last week. We now call it executive team meeting because we got where our leadership is bigger than just the executive team. That's actually kind of exciting. Just happened. And we were talking about how this guy really, really shines in certain areas and struggles in these other ones. And we're like, what if we created a job where we could capitalize on these strengths and amazing talents and skills that he has, which would be a win for all of us because it is a role now that we need filled, and it's one where he could shine. Yeah, awesome. Right. And instead of just letting him go, did you involve him at all in the job description and in designing that job? Well, I mean, we just barely did it last week, but we used his strengths to kind of decide how we want to roll it out or have it look. And then next time when we meet with him, we're going to share it with him and see if we want to change or add or if he's even interested. But at least it got our brains working around that new role. Well, that's awesome. Yeah. And your question for me was like some signs or things that you notice when it's time to move on from someone. It's a hard one to quantify, but for me, I keep thinking of the phrase, I just want relationships that work. I don't want to work on relationships all the time. Yeah, those are not the ones that leave you feeling good at the end of the day. They leave you feeling drained if you have to work on them constantly. And if I'm spending all my time thinking about that and not my business and not prospecting and growing my team, if I'm draining my energy on conflict and interpersonal and constantly fixing problems that this person's already been shown. Helping them feel good about it. Yeah, helping and worrying them feel excited about them. Or it's like a balloon, that you have to like blow up this balloon, and then as you walk away, it starts to deflate, and you have to come back and blow it up. Yeah. No, you want somebody who's adding to it themselves. I don't want to have to prop them up, right? And I've had a few where I've learned a little bit about my own personality, and they weren't the right personality for me. So sometimes it's just because your personalities don't fit. The job that you need them to do and the way that you interact with that person, it needs to be synergistic. And if it's not, then that's one reason. Another one for me is somebody who's just truly incompetent. Sometimes you don't learn that until after you bring them on and you try to train them and they just don't get it. Right. It's so hard. We try so hard to weed that out during the interview process, but sometimes you can't. Sometimes I've had first day on the job, I knew this is not going to be good. I remember you telling me about this one and how long did it end up taking? It was you knew the first 4 months. Yeah. 4 months. 4 months of trying to work and coach and improve and help. And it's like knocking my head against the wall. And really what happened was other members of the team started quitting, started turning in their 2 weeks notice. And you're like, I would prefer them than you. Right. And it was way too late in the game to do it, but the moment it was done, it was like sunshine came out from behind the clouds. Songs in the background, all of that. Some other reasons might be, I really have had some cases where there was just dishonesty, right? So we talk about firing someone for cause, fraud, time theft, time clock, dishonesty. That's a hard one. My first time I ever fired somebody, I was really young. This is probably 25 years ago. Yeah. And I couldn't even do it. We had this girl that was clocking in and going out to her car and come back 3 hours later Oh, wow.
And
That's
then
like
she would
significant.
clock out.
Not even just like a 5 to 10 minute.
And we had documentation of it. And so my boss said, go get that girl, bring her in. We're going to let her go. Mm-hmm. So I went and got her, and we sat down, and he's like, you're going to do it. And so, it was supposed to be like, hey, did you cheat on your time clock? You're fired. Right. And I got to, hey, did you cheat on your time clock? And she said, yes. And I froze. I actually started shaking. Like I couldn't
like you just
do
felt
it.
Cruel.
Yeah. And so my boss is like, you're fired. And she just took it over from there. And there's a lot of fear. It's a very hard, especially if you're a conflict avoidant person, to come out and do it that way. Right.
I had my very first time I ever fired somebody was ironically about 25 years ago too.
Really?
And I was young at the time, and this person was probably 10, 15 years older than me and a single mom. And she kept coming in late. And so twice I changed her start time, and I said, pretend I didn't, and just try to come in still at 7:30. Mm-hmm. And she started coming in, instead of at 7:45 or 7:50, which was 15, 20 minutes late, she started coming in at 8:15 or 8:20 because I'd moved the time to 8 o'clock. And then I moved it again to 8:30, and she did it again. And I'm like, she's chronically late. And because I worked for a very large corporation with thousands and thousands of employees, you cannot write them up and then not fire them, because then you're inconsistent.
Yeah.
That was a tough one, because she started to cry and everything. And then that was one of my moments when, now as a mom, because I have 4 kids, I often will talk about how I want to make sure that I teach my kids how to be on time, how to meet their responsibilities, how to do what they're asked, how to, complete a job the way that it was assigned. By the way, that's what school's the best for. So when someone complains that I'm never going to use this subject in real life, I'm like, what are you talking about? It's your chance to receive an assignment, get it done the way it was assigned in the timeline that it was given, and then you're paid with a grade. You get to practice real life. Anyways,
parenting tips here. That's good.
Right? Yeah. Throw a couple of those in. So I want them to learn it from me, not from the, wife that divorces them, because I have all sons, not from the policeman that arrests them or the boss that fires them. Yeah. But unfortunately, we're kind of stuck in that sometimes, because some of our employees were never taught this. And so we have to be the boss that fires them, that teaches them.
That they're learning. It's even almost compassionate on the way out, right? It's like, okay, if they didn't suffer that consequence, how would they ever learn?
Yeah. Right. And if it's not working for me, then that's okay. Yeah. And maybe their next boss will be okay with it, or maybe this will be the lesson they need in order to perform better at their next job.
Yeah. I think the other thing that I just want to point out here is you don't necessarily have to wait for the employee to decide it's not working.
Yes.
It's okay as the employer to say, yeah, I don't want to do this anymore. This is, most of it, I know in Utah where we are, it's an at-will state. We don't have employment contracts. There's no reason why I can't decide that I don't want that person working for me anymore. To be honest, I don't even have to have a reason, right? Yeah. Now, we should talk about protecting ourselves as employers and ways to prevent things like our unemployment insurance premiums going up, lawsuits and things like that. And we're going to get into that. But I just want to point out, I had an employee that, I could tell where it was going. And if I had waited, it probably would have gone on for a few more weeks until she found a job. And then she would have tried to give me 2 weeks notice, and I probably wouldn't have needed it, and I would have let her go. And I just had the realization that I don't need to wait for that. I know where it's going. I pulled her into the office. And like you said, it was a kind of a mutual thing. We both knew it was coming. It wasn't a surprise to her. But I fortunately didn't have to live through that 3-week period of just waiting.
There's a different emotion that goes through your mind and in your heart when you really, truly embrace, this is my company. And some of you out there already have no problem with that. Yeah. But for a lot of us, sometimes it still feels like it's a full team effort instead of like, I truly am the captain of this ship. Yeah. And I'm the one who everyone else is depending on to make the good decisions for all of us.
Yeah. Before we move on, one tip I might share, if this idea of having to let someone go is part of what holds you back from actually hiring someone, what I would recommend is maybe build in a probationary period into your job offers and just say it's a 90-day probation. We're going to get started. We're going to work together, and we're going to meet at the end of 90 days and decide how to proceed.
Yeah, ours, we actually do a 30, 60, 90. So when they sit down, we say, this is what we want you to be proficient at and what we want you to accomplish at the 30-day mark, 60-day mark, 90-day mark, and we meet ideally, I should say ideally, we meet at each of those points. And even if we don't set up the meeting, we still want them to report on how they did with those, in an email or some sort like that. And that's been really helpful. Cool. I did think of one other reason why to let somebody go is that I had the one that happened in the last couple of weeks is that the job had evolved, and the job had evolved into something that no longer resonated with what she wanted to do and what we needed as a brokerage and how that worked. And so when we get into the point of how to let somebody go, I'll talk through how that went. But what it kind of boiled down to in talking to her is, as I talked about what it was that we wanted, and she's saying, I really just don't love that. I don't want that piece. I was saying, there's nothing wrong with that. It's okay. It's just a job description. And if you don't like it, that's fine. It says nothing about you. It just says that you don't like this job description. And that's fine.
Yeah.
So sometimes it can be mutual that way as well.
Yeah, and if you don't make it personal, right? I think I've had some employees leave on really good terms. So we just either that person or I decided it was time to do something different, and it can be really compassionate and really good.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about
how to do it.
Yeah, and really how to protect yourself and go through the right process so that you don't expose yourself to either lawsuits or the dreaded unemployment.
Right.
And just to be clear, if you have an employee who you let go and they go file a claim for unemployment insurance benefits, that can cost you as an employer, right?
Yep.
Not dollar for dollar, but they'll come back and rate you each year on your premium how much you should pay towards the unemployment fund.
Based on how many claims you've had.
Yeah, based on how many people you're putting
on
unemployment, right? So you want to protect that. You want to protect, it's almost like a credit rating as an employer. You want to protect your unemployment picture. And so let's talk about some ways to do that. You've heard of PIPs?
Oh, yes. Performance
improvement plans?
Yes.
So what are those, and why would we want to do that?
So we use PIPs a lot in our brokerage, and so we have some minimum expectations that people are supposed to meet. And if ever that's not occurring, we meet together. And we've actually found that if we take the approach of a performance improvement plan, we actually do this for our agents and our admin. Our agents, it's usually just about production. So we actually renamed it to be production improvement plan. Yeah. And so even though we require it for people who are below the threshold, we offer it to everybody above the threshold as well, and just say, we're going to brainstorm together how to get you up. And then for our admin, we've had to do it a few times, and in there it is a performance improvement plan, but we still treat it the same way, as though it's a positive experience to say, hey, it's not quite where we need it to be. We all want to be winners here. We all want this to be beneficial. So let's look at what the shortfall is and put our heads together on how to fix it.
I like that you're coming at it with a goal of improvement, right? It's not like, hey, here's a firing plan.
Here's everything you suck at.
Here's a way, and you're almost like a cheerleader for them. We want this to work. We want you to know where you're falling short, and we want to help you get there. And so not all PIPs turn into letting someone go, right? You can PIP someone up or you can PIP someone out, but it's a mechanism, right? And what does that look like, and why do you guys do it?
So what it looks like is, normally what we'll do is we really want to get very clear. We have learned that sometimes we're not clear. Sometimes we'll have in our head what it is that we're expecting, and we will think that we've communicated it thoroughly enough that they're going to catch that ball and run with it. And then as we're going through the PIP and we're saying, okay, these are the expectations we had. There was once, in fact, when we had made the whole list and we had the form that we were going to fill out where we put the goals at the bottom and we sign it. And as we started to talk through the expectations that we had and where they weren't being met, we received some really great feedback of the way it was given to me was not clear. I was receiving direction from more than one person. I didn't know who I was supposed to follow. I really wasn't given a deadline. Going back through this, I didn't get that. And so we realized in that moment, we were not in a PIP scenario here. We were in a let's get clear about what's expected scenario where getting on the same page, not saying you're deficient. And it was a completely different one. We did end up having to do a PIP later, and we did end up, having to let this person go. But that first meeting did make it clear to us that clarity of what we expect is so crucial, especially during the first phases where they're learning how to do the job.
That's awesome. Wow. Very helpful. So you're going through this process: verbal warning, written warning, final warning. Oftentimes it's on the same topic, right? It's like, okay, you're not getting to work on time. So there's a verbal warning. Sometimes you'll still have them sign that they received a verbal warning, right? Or you'll document just a note to yourself, hey, I sat down today with so-and-so, I did a verbal warning. Later.
Oh, I do have something to add into that. So we tell them in the interview process, and we also talk about it as we go, that I'm trying to think. My brain just went to 5 different thoughts, and so now I got to bring it back to what it was. So the process that we do if something's not working out the way we want it, such as me delegating something to them and it not working out the way that they're doing it, this process applies to tons of stuff. But basically it is sitting down with them and saying, this is what occurred. And you talk about how, the job was completed or not completed. This is what occurred. This is how it impacted me. And this is what I want to see instead.
Okay.
And then we talk through, what I want to see instead. How are we going to get there? Because the way that I thought through in my brain might not be the best way to do it. They might have some good ideas. And so talking through that then makes it really clear to them, okay, this is what I need to fix.
Is this like a worksheet that you guys fill out that has these blanks on it that you sit down and remember?
We talk about it all the time with our agents, with our clients, with our team. This is what happened. This is how it impacted me. This is what I want to see instead. Okay. So... Awesome. And then we also attribute it to the 3 things. I think I mentioned this in a previous episode, that if something's not occurring the way we want, it's either the training, the knowledge, or it's the systems, or it's the support. And so sometimes in these feedbacks, we'll find out that we didn't give enough training or information, or they don't have the right systems in place. Maybe they need a better checklist, or maybe they need a different software or program. And then the last one, support, is maybe they just don't have the right support from the team or the leadership or manpower. Sometimes that's what it is.
I'm having this flashback to a time when I was an employee and I was put on a PIP and I was really young. And I think if they had approached it the way you approach it, which was, open-minded, maybe we're part of the problem here, right?
Yeah, because a lot of times the leadership is part of the problem.
Right, usually, honestly, more often than not, it's our own fault that things aren't working out, right? Yeah. And so giving a fair process to evaluate that together and approaching it like, hey, we want you here. We want this to be better. We want this to work. But I remember I worked it was this call center and I was getting in trouble for errors, right? I kept having typos on stuff that I was doing and they would write me up, and I got to the point where I was on final warning, and so I quit. I went and found a different job and I quit. And ironically, they just were all over themselves to keep me. Like, no, don't go. We love you. We want you here. I'm like, are you kidding? I'm on final warning here. I'm about to get let go. And so maybe just word of advice, if you're going to go down that path, unless you're doing it with the right heart and unless they know that it's an improvement plan, don't be surprised if they leave. Don't be surprised if they move on, And I guess that's part of the goal is you either pip them up, like I said, or pip them out.
I like that. Pump them up, pip them up.
Pump them up, pip them out. Not pimp them out. Pip them out. Pip
them out.
Yeah. Okay, so we're talking about protecting yourself. So one of the reasons why you do a PIP and you document all this stuff is so that you do have all of this documentation about the efforts you went through and about the reasons why you may have let them go. Because if they go file an unemployment insurance claim, you have an opportunity to defend yourself. And
and that happened to you, right?
It has happened to me. And honestly, the 2 times it's happened, though, it wasn't in this scenario. The other way that you might let someone go is just firing them for cause. So let's say you're not doing a PIP with somebody.
It's for cause, like something
they
happened.
do something wrong, right? Dishonesty, for example, stealing, time clock dishonesty, those things, there's no reason to drag that out. You can pull them aside, just fire them, just let them go. And twice this year I've had to do that. And we just kind of sat down and gathered our notes. Gathered up, we had a recorded call here or an email here or evidence of what they had done here and there. Saved it in a file because I knew in a couple weeks I'm going to get an unemployment claim from this employee who's going to be out there. And it was just very easy to respond to the claim, submit the recordings, submit the proof of what the person did, and then we won the case.
Yep. The other thing too is we had to let one of our agents go. Similar situation. It was a dishonesty thing, and so it was it ended right here type situation. And she was of a minority ethnicity and such, and so we needed to make sure that we had everything documented so it couldn't come back as a discrimination.
Yeah.
So like the discrimination things to really be aware of is what's listed in the Constitution. I don't know if it's right, but basically you can't discriminate against age, gender, religion, ethnicity.
I keep thinking fair housing laws.
I know fair housing also says
equal
familial
credit
status.
opportunity. Yeah.
All of those things.
It's pretty clear what you should.
Yeah, well, I
what
mean,
are protected classes and things that we shouldn't be discriminating against?
Which obviously we wouldn't anyways, but this is why you want to keep documented proof, because if they say you did, then you can say, no, it really is like if anybody had done these things, they would be done.
The other thing that I kind of fear is a wrongful termination lawsuit.
Right.
And one thing that I've used and I've learned, I have a really good HR partner. They take care of a lot of my benefits, and then they have resources to call. And so I called them once and I said, hey, I need to fire somebody. And they recommended a severance agreement. They actually had some advice on how to put one together, and I went and got one set up. And a severance agreement can really protect you against the lawsuit angle because you're having both you and the employee sign.
And the employee sign that they agree to the terms.
Yeah, these are the terms, and you're giving some money in exchange for their agreement to not pursue any further damages.
Right, and you glossed right over fast about the HR resource. Like so many of us, me included, when we were chatting about this podcast, you mentioned that. I'm like, what? You have an HR resource?
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
I guess I'll put a plug in for that. I think they're a Utah company, Fringe Benefit Analysts. If you need to contact them, just reach out to us on our show notes. Our webpage is businessgreaterthanYou.com, right? businessgreaterthanyoupodcast.com, and you can email us there, and I can get you in touch with them. But they do all of our insurance and a lot of our benefits, and so they have hotlines. They helped us with our employee handbook, all of this kind of legal protection as an employer. They do a great job, and so they help me understand why I might want a severance agreement. And I don't think they actually gave me one. They just recommended to reach out to an attorney and get one drafted up.
Nice. And that's another thing too that I don't think we've talked much about, but now is a really good time to put that plug in. You've got to have your team as a small business. So having a resource when you have HR questions, having an attorney on retainer. So we have 3 different ones that we reach out to depending on what the subject is about. So we have one that has our employee contracts, and we have one that has if there's a real estate issue. Actually, maybe we just have 2.
How much does that cost you? Do you pay them a retainer, or do they just represent you when you need them? Or?
Our first one, we've just been working with him long enough that we don't pay retainer. He just bills us monthly, depending on how much we call him, and that has to do with employee contracts. So the one with the dishonesty, when we reached out to him, we said we're looking at terminating this agent, and we just want to make sure that we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's, and we're not leaving ourselves open, because we had him send the termination agreement. And I think it gave us some clout. And so then she went through an attorney as well, and we came to an agreement that's working for all of us, which is nice. And then our other one is like, if there's something with our buyers or sellers, if they have a question that something might come up. So she litigates that. And we wanted an attorney who does litigation. We didn't just want an attorney who's all hypothetical. And
someone's not afraid to go to court, not afraid to sue somebody. Or
someone who knows what actually happens in the courtroom, not just what hypothetical in the chat boxes. Yeah,
honestly, I haven't used too many attorneys. Obviously, there's been certain moments when I've hired an attorney or sought an attorney's advice. But like with this severance agreement, I don't really know if the severance agreement that I use would necessarily hold up in a courtroom. But I think one of the benefits is that it keeps me out of the courtroom. Right. It's just the employee recognizes, hey, I'm not going to sue you, and I'm signing here to say I'm not going to sue you. And honestly, I am giving them a severance package, right? I'm giving them something of value. The last person we let go, I got a month of severance to give her time to look for another job.
That makes the conversation a lot easier too, because when you go in and you sit down and you say, okay, we've talked about this a couple times before, or this is kind of new, but the way that it shifted really quick. So the one that I had just a couple weeks ago, I actually sat down and I said, the job has shifted. As you know, it's evolved over the last few months, and it's not being done the way that we need. What are your thoughts? And she said, well, I'll be honest, I've really hated coming to work the last while. And I said, I know, I can tell, and I'm so sorry. This is what we need. And so we went back and forth a little bit, and we said, well, why don't you think about it? Let us know what you want to do. And came back, and it was awesome. Actually, everybody felt really good about the move that we're making, and it seemed like the good timing, everything. So it's interesting the way that can happen when it's not necessarily because it was for cause, you know?
It's just an agreement, right?
It's an agreement.
And it can be, I tend to try to be overly fair and generous, just because, I feel for the employee. I mean, I know what it's like to be unemployed and to be looking and have
and so to have that income still coming in,
right? And
that makes it so much easier for them to say, oh my gosh, I could go find a different job that fits me better, since I don't have to worry about having no money next week for my gas bill.
Right.
So
So let me ask you now, I guess the last point I wanted to touch on, and maybe you have more, but I want to talk about protecting the team morale when something like this happens.
Because a few different things could happen. It could be the gossip wheel. There could be the, oh crap, maybe I'm getting cut next.
Maybe I'm
next. The fear that then starts going through.
There's a lot of gossip probably happening before it ever happens, right? Before you actually let someone
we're gonna be
go.
Honest, that's true.
The whispers are happening. People are in back corners. If you ever see someone standing outside your office having a conversation with another employee, that's probably a bad sign. Or they're on their phone a lot. Outside, maybe they're talking to other people in the office or other potential employers or something like that. But all of that rumor mill is going, and I don't think it's. I think it's a good idea. And what I've always done is try to, as soon as it's done, gather everyone together. Just a quick impromptu.
Oh, you know what? Do you mind if we pause right here? Mm-hmm. When it's done, when you sit down with them, especially if it's a for-cause termination, it's a really good idea to already have their final paycheck cut and be able just to hand them a paper check and lock them out of all of the systems. Yeah. Because if they're going to be malicious, you don't want to give them the opportunity to be malicious.
Great point. Yeah. Which actually you got to think about that way ahead of time, right? Yeah. How many different systems do they have different sign-ins to? Which ones are the most important ones? How quickly can you turn them off? We've had cases where while I'm sitting down with this employee delivering the news, our office manager is shutting off system access.
That's usually how it needs to happen.
And I've already got her final check, and those were the ones that were for cause, right? Right. But as soon as that happened, as soon as she was out the door, my concern was rallying the rest of the troops together, and I wanted to get a little bit of a control on that narrative. I don't. Oh, he did this, and he said this, and he didn't like her because of this, and this is why she's gone, and she said that he had already blah blah, and I wanted to have a chance to own the narrative a little bit myself, and so twice now I've just gathered the team around, get everyone off their phone calls, and just say, okay, today was so and so's last day. Now you can't share too much, right? You can't over disclose, but in most cases it's just great to let them know that it's not the beginning of a whole bunch of firings. Let them know that, give them a chance to ask questions. A lot of times they'll say, well, who's gonna fill in for her job, and how can I help? And a lot of times you get feedback like, thank you for bringing us together and being clear about this. And I just love that thought. I don't know who taught it to me, but it's just the worst thing you could do is just go back in your office and close the door.
And let them all wonder what just happened. They make up stories that are always, more extreme and extravagant than what really happened. One of ours, shortly after we had let an agent go for consistent, significant underperformance, we had set up a review. Our reviews with our agents are always, let's champion what you've done well. Let's identify what could be done better. Let's put together a plan and get you to the next level. Like it's a positive, awesome experience. So we had set up one of those with an agent only like a week after we had let somebody go. And we set it up on Friday, and our meeting was like on Monday or Tuesday. And she came into it and like was like, oh my gosh, you're really not letting me go? I said, what? She's like, I really was like losing my mind all weekend long thinking that that's what you had set this meeting up for and trying to figure out what I was going to do instead. And I just went, oh, okay, we did not handle it well enough when we explained why. And so one of the things we've learned too is to share with them what our process is. If ever somebody is really falling behind, we're going to have multiple meetings to say, hey, how can we get this up? And we're going to give you fair warning. And I'm like, you've never even had one. Why would you jump to that conclusion? And she's like, well, I just haven't done as much as I wanted to. And we're like, you're good. Yeah. You're so good.
Cool. Well, anything else? What else do we need to touch on as far as letting people go?
I think kind of the last thing that I would really like to touch on is just, this is a perfect time to remember the golden rule, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. So always treat them with dignity. Always assume that there's probably a really good reason why they're not showing up the way that you want them to. And that if it's because, training, systems, or support, maybe it's something you can fix. Maybe it's just that the job description isn't a good fit for them. And that's where I love to just come back to, so what? It's a freaking job description. If you don't like it, that's fine. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with the job I decided I want done. Maybe we can align it, or maybe not. Maybe you'll be happier somewhere else. And when we can give a severance package, it makes it convenient.
Yeah.
More
well, and I'm
peaceful.
just thinking about it as we're talking about this, the whole process we've been through on these first few episodes where we've talked about, the hiring process and then the onboarding and the training process. When you get to a point where you have to let someone go, you inevitably are going to notice your own flaws. Where did we go wrong? And you circle back and you improve them. And it might take time. You're not going to be a master of business ownership from day one. No, but this is experience, right? This is gaining knowledge and skill and improving your processes. And part of it is failing.
Right.
Sometimes.
Yeah. Well, failure is a necessary step on the road to success.
Yeah. Yep. And we've all done it. We will do it more, right? And hopefully you learn from them and you get better as you go.
Well, that's what we're hoping is we're all going to learn a lot through these podcasts.
Absolutely. Well, we're excited to keep talking. We've got some guests coming up that we're going to interview and find out how they do it and how they've built a team of their own, a business greater than them. And so stay tuned for the next episode, and we'll see you then.
All right. Thanks for listening.